Everything was ready, the dress, the guests, the reception. An hour before the wedding, I discovered my fiancé was cheating on me with my friend. Instead of tears, I put on my white dress, walked to the altar, and made them both remember this day forever. I loved Trevor for 7 years. We met in college during our sophomore year, in Professor Martinez's Literature of the American South class. He sat 2 rows behind me, and I always caught him staring when I raised my hand to answer questions. Trevor wasn't like the other guys who tried too hard to be cool or distant. He was genuine, warm, and unafraid to show his feelings. Our first date wasn't actually supposed to be a date. We were partnered for a class project on Faulkner, and he suggested we work on it at this tiny coffee shop just off campus called The Daily Grind. I remember how he kept fidgeting with his coffee cup, spinning it around and around on the wooden table while we talked about stream of consciousness narratives. We ended up staying there until closing time, and our discussion had drifted far from Faulkner to our families, our dreams, and our favorite movies. He walked me back to my dorm that night, and just before saying goodbye, he asked if we could do it again sometime, without the homework. That was the beginning of us. Trevor was the kind of boyfriend every girl dreamed of, attentive without being clingy, romantic without being cheesy. He'd surprise me with coffee before my morning classes, remembering exactly how I liked it, oat milk latte with an extra shot and just a touch of vanilla. He'd leave little notes in my textbooks, usually terrible puns that made me laugh out loud in the middle of the library. When I was stressed about finals, he'd show up at my door with my favorite comfort food, mac and cheese from that food truck by the Science Building. After graduation, when we both landed jobs in Boston, moving in together felt natural. Our apartment wasn't much, a 4th-floor walk-up in Somerville with creaky floors and a temperamental radiator, but it was ours. We painted the walls together, argued about furniture arrangements, and learned to cook real meals instead of surviving on ramen and takeout. Trevor would practice his presentations for work in front of me, pacing our small living room while I gave him feedback from our second-hand couch. The proposal came on our 5th anniversary. He took me back to that same coffee shop where we'd had our first not-quite date. The Daily Grind had changed owners twice since then, but they still made the best vanilla lattes in town. He got down on one knee right there between the mismatched armchairs where we'd first talked about our dreams, and pulled out a ring that was exactly what I would have chosen for myself, vintage-inspired, with a delicate Art Deco setting. I said yes before he could even finish asking the question. The other customers applauded, and the barista brought us free pastries. I remember thinking this was exactly how love should be, warm, comfortable, and sure. The next 18 months were a whirlwind of wedding planning. My best friend Sarah was there for all of it. She'd been my roommate junior and senior year of college, and we'd stayed close even after graduation when she moved to Chicago for work. She flew in for every major planning event, dress shopping, venue tours, menu tastings. She was the one who suggested the Hayes Adams Hotel for the reception, with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston Public Garden. "It's perfect for you guys," she said, squeezing my hand as we toured the ballroom. "Classic but not stuffy, elegant but still fun. Just like you and Trevor." I trusted her judgment completely. After all, she knew us both so well. She knew our story, our inside jokes, our dreams for the future. When she offered to help coordinate with the vendors since she had experience planning corporate events, I was grateful. When she said she'd fly in a week early to help with last-minute details, I thought I was the luckiest bride in the world to have such a dedicated friend. Looking back, there were signs. Tiny moments that seemed insignificant at the time but now play back in my mind like scenes from a horror movie where the audience wants to scream at the protagonist, "Don't go in there." Like how Sarah always managed to be around when Trevor was going over vendor contracts with me. How she insisted on accompanying him to his final tux fitting when I had a work emergency. The way she'd casually mention running into him at that coffee shop near his office, even though it was nowhere near her hotel. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy with my own pre-wedding chaos, final dress alterations, confirming the photographer's shot list, making sure my grandmother's flight from Florida was still on schedule. Besides, Trevor seemed more attentive than ever. He'd started leaving his phone face down on tables, but I assumed he was just trying to be more present in the moment, like that mindfulness podcast he'd been listening to suggested. The rehearsal dinner was at Bella Luna, this intimate Italian place in the North End that Trevor and I had discovered on our first anniversary. Everything was perfect, the warmth of the candlelight, the rich aroma of garlic and fresh herbs, the sound of laughter mixing with Dean Martin playing softly in the background. My parents were there, beaming with pride. Trevor's mom was already calling me daughter. Sarah gave a beautiful toast about friendship and love that made me tear up. I should have noticed how her hand lingered on Trevor's shoulder when she sat down. I should have seen how he tensed slightly when she mentioned their special friendship. But I was floating in a bubble of pre-wedding bliss, seeing everything through rose-colored glasses. The bubble burst at 11:42 p.m. I was in my hotel room, doing a final check of my wedding day timeline when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it. Almost. The message was simple: "I'm sorry, but you need to see this before tomorrow." There was a video attachment. The thumbnail was dark, but I could make out the Hayes Adams Hotel's distinctive lobby chandelier in the background. My finger hovered over the play button. Something in my gut screamed at me not to press it. But I did. The video was from what looked like a security camera. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m. that very afternoon. There was Trevor, still in his work clothes, walking through the lobby. And there was Sarah, waiting by the elevator bank. When she saw him, she smiled, not the bright, friendly smile I knew, but something else. Something secret. Something hungry. They didn't kiss in the lobby. They were too careful for that. But I watched as they got into the same elevator. The next clip showed them emerging on the 12th floor, the same floor where Trevor and I were supposed to spend our wedding night. They walked down the hallway, Sarah's hand in Trevor's back pocket, his lips at her ear, both of them laughing about something I couldn't hear. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. But I forced myself to keep watching. The final clip showed them leaving separately 2 hours later. Sarah checked her lipstick in a mirrored wall. Trevor adjusted his tie. They looked so practiced, so comfortable with their routine. This clearly wasn't the first time. I ran to the bathroom and threw up everything I'd eaten at the rehearsal dinner. Then I sat on the cold tile floor, my wedding day schedule scattered around me like confetti, and tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. 7 years of love. 7 years of trust. 7 years of building a life together. And all along, he'd been capable of this. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah. "Just wanted to check if you need anything before tomorrow. Can't wait to see you be the most beautiful bride." The heart emoji made my blood boil. I started typing and deleting responses, angry accusations, desperate questions, strings of expletives. But then something cold and clear settled over me. A strange calm. And clarity of purpose. I texted back, "All good. Just going over the final details. Thank you for everything." Then I opened my laptop and began to plan. I had 12 hours until the ceremony. 12 hours to ensure that Trevor and Sarah would never forget what they'd done. 12 hours to transform from a victim into an architect of justice. First, I called my friend Marcus who worked in IT. He owed me a favor from when I'd helped him through his divorce last year. I needed him to do 2 things, clean up the video quality and set up a projection system in the church that I could control from my phone. He didn't ask questions. Good friends know when not to ask questions. Next, I called the Hayes Adams Hotel's accounting department. Being a former event planner had its perks, I knew exactly how to sound professional and authoritative. "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell's assistant. She asked me to verify the payment details for tomorrow's wedding reception." The clerk was helpful, especially when I mentioned Sarah's name. After all, she'd been the one handling most of the arrangements lately. Within 20 minutes, I had transferred the entire reception bill to a new account, one I'd set up in Sarah's name using the information I had from when she'd crashed on our couch last Christmas. The hotel would process the final payment the morning after the wedding. By then, I'd be long gone. I took a hot shower, letting the water wash away my tears until only cold determination remained. Then I did my nails, perfect French manicure, classic bride. I laid out my something old, my grandmother's pearl earrings, something new, the lacy garter I'd bought at a boutique in New York, something borrowed, a vintage clutch from my mother, and something blue, a sapphire bracelet that Trevor had given me for our 5th anniversary. Oh, the irony. Sleep wasn't an option, but I needed to look fresh. I made myself comfortable in the hotel room's plush armchair, applied a Korean face mask, and started making calls. First to my bank, then to our travel agent, then to a few strategic others. By sunrise, everything was in place. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear. My mother arrived early with coffee and bagels, fussing over my hair and makeup team. My bridesmaids filtered in, exclaiming over their matching robes and the champagne I'd arranged. Sarah was there too, all wide eyes and helpful hands, not a hint of guilt on her perfectly made-up face. "You look so calm," she said, helping me into my dress. I'd be a nervous wreck. I smiled at her in the mirror. I just know exactly how today is going to go. The dress was everything I'd dreamed of, an elegant A-line with delicate lace appliques and a sweetheart neckline. The bodice hugged my curves perfectly, and the skirt moved like water when I walked. I'd chosen it months ago at Bella's Bridal in downtown Boston, with Sarah by my side. Now I wondered if she'd been picturing herself in it even then. My father arrived as the makeup artist was adding the final touches. His eyes welled up when he saw me. "Princess, you're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." I hugged him tight, breathing in his familiar cologne. "Thanks, Dad. Just, whatever happens today, remember that I love you, okay?" He looked puzzled but nodded. The limo was waiting. The church was a historic Episcopal building in Cambridge, all Gothic arches and stained glass. As we pulled up, I could see guests filing in, dressed in their Sunday best. Through the window, I spotted Trevor greeting people at the entrance, handsome in his black tuxedo. He was smiling, relaxed, probably thinking he'd gotten away with everything. In the bride's room, my hands were steady as I checked my phone. Everything was in place. Marcus had texted confirmation that the AV system was ready. The hotel had processed the billing change. My travel arrangements were confirmed. All I had to do now was walk down that aisle and deliver the performance of a lifetime. Sarah gave me one last hug before taking her place with the other bridesmaids. "You deserve all the happiness in the world," she whispered, and I had to admire her acting skills. The organ began to play. Through the church doors, I could see the back of Trevor's head as he stood at the altar. 200 guests turned to watch as the bridesmaids began their procession. Sarah went last, just before me, carrying her bouquet of pink peonies and white roses. Perfect Sarah, who'd been the ideal best friend, the helpful bridesmaid, the secret betrayer. My father took my arm. "Ready, sweetheart?" I gripped my bouquet tighter. "More than ready." The wedding march began to play, and the congregation rose. As I stepped into the doorway, I saw Trevor's face light up with what looked like genuine joy. He was either an excellent actor or completely delusional. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't going to be a wedding. This was going to be a reckoning. I walked down the aisle with measured steps, my father's arm steady against mine. Each step brought me closer to the altar, closer to Trevor's smiling face, closer to Sarah's perfectly composed expression in the front row. The light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the floor. Everything looked like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, I'd learned, were just pretty lies we tell ourselves. When we reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Trevor's. Trevor's palm was warm and slightly damp, nervous excitement, I assumed, or maybe guilt finally catching up with him. The priest began his welcome, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I waited until he finished his introduction, until all eyes were fixed on us, until Trevor had just begun to relax. Then I turned to face our guests. "Before we continue," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I'd like to share something with everyone." I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. The church's projection system hummed to life, and the massive screen Marcus had installed descended behind the altar. Trevor's grip on my hand tightened. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I smiled at him, the same smile he'd given me every morning over coffee. "I'm giving you the wedding day you deserve." The video began to play. The crystal-clear footage showed every detail: Trevor and Sarah in the hotel lobby, their intimate elevator ride, their departure hours later. Marcus had even added timestamps and enhanced the audio. Their laughter echoed through the church's speaker system. The reactions came in waves. First, shocked gasps. Then murmurs. Then outright exclamations. Trevor's mother covered her mouth with both hands. My father half rose from his seat, but my mother held him back. Sarah, in the front row, had turned the color of old milk. "Baby, I can explain," Trevor started, but I held up my hand. "Oh, I'm not finished." I turned to address our guests again. "You see, while these two were planning their little rendezvous, I was planning too. Sarah, remember how you insisted on handling all the vendor payments? How you said it was the least you could do for your best friend?" I watched her face as understanding began to dawn. "Well, surprise. The entire reception, the food, the band, the open bar, it's all been transferred to your account. The Hayes Adams Hotel has excellent customer service, by the way. They were very helpful when your assistant called to update the billing information." Sarah jumped to her feet. "You can't do that. That's fraud." "Actually, it's not. You signed all the contracts, remember? Check your email, you'll find copies of everything. You were so eager to help with the planning, after all." Trevor grabbed my arm. "Stop this. You're making a scene." I jerked away from him. "A scene? Like the scene you two made in that hotel? Or maybe like this scene?" I pressed another button on my phone, and new footage appeared on the screen, more encounters, different dates, going back months. "Did you really think a hotel that expensive wouldn't have security cameras everywhere? In the lobby, the elevators, the hallways, the fire exits?" The church had erupted into chaos. Trevor's best man was backing away from him. Sarah was frantically checking her phone, probably seeing the payment confirmations rolling in. My bridesmaids were huddled together, whispering and pointing. I turned back to Trevor, who stood frozen at the altar. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually considered forgiving you. Last night, for about 5 minutes, I thought maybe we could work through this. But then I remembered every lie, every time you looked me in the eye and said you loved me while you were sleeping with my best friend. And I realized, you don't deserve forgiveness. You deserve this." I reached up and removed my grandmother's pearl earrings. No need to waste something precious on this performance. "Oh, and the honeymoon? I took care of that too. The suite at the Four Seasons Bora Bora is non-refundable, but don't worry, I'll make good use of it. I hear it's beautiful this time of year." Sarah lunged forward, her face contorted with rage and panic. "You vindictive bitch. You can't stick me with the reception bill. It's thousands of dollars." I smiled serenely. 35,000, to be exact. "But hey, maybe Trevor will help you pay it off. You two seem to be good at sharing things behind my back." With that, I gathered my skirts and walked back down the aisle, head held high. The guests parted before me like the Red Sea, their expressions a mix of horror, admiration, and disbelief. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting, Sarah's shrill protests, Trevor's stammered excuses, his mother's sobs, my father's booming voice demanding explanations. But I didn't look back. I'd learned from Lot's wife, some things are better left behind. Outside, the spring sunshine felt different on my skin. Cleaner somehow. My getaway car, not the decorated limo, but a sleek black Uber I'd arranged the night before, was waiting exactly where I'd specified, around the corner from the church. The driver didn't bat an eye at my wedding dress as I slid into the back seat. Logan International, Terminal E, I said, and we pulled away from the curb. My phone started blowing up with messages and calls. I turned it off. They could wait. The only message I wanted to see was the one that would come later from the hotel's billing department, confirming the charges had gone through. At the airport, I caught my reflection in the terminal windows, a bride in full regalia, rolling a carry-on suitcase through the international departure hall. A few people stared, but most just smiled sympathetically, probably assuming I was heading to my honeymoon. They weren't entirely wrong. In the first-class lounge, I finally changed out of my wedding dress, carefully packing it into a garment bag. I had plans for it. A women's shelter back home could probably use it for someone who actually deserved a happy ending. I changed into the outfit I'd packed the night before, a white linen sundress that felt like armor and revenge all at once. The flight attendant brought me champagne before takeoff. "Congratulations," she said, noticing my carefully styled hair and professional makeup. "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it. I was celebrating, just not what she thought. As the plane took off, banking over Boston Harbor, I thought about Trevor and Sarah. By now, they'd be dealing with the fallout. The video would be spreading through our social circles like wildfire. I'd made sure Marcus uploaded it to a private server accessible to all our wedding guests. Their phones would be exploding with messages. Their reputations would be in tatters. The bills would be rolling in. Their carefully constructed world of lies would be crumbling around them. But something unexpected was happening inside me. As the Massachusetts coastline disappeared beneath the clouds, I felt the anger starting to dissolve, replaced by something else. Not forgiveness, never that, but perhaps, liberation. In trying to destroy me, Trevor and Sarah had inadvertently set me free. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not about them, but about me. About the woman who walked into a church wearing a white dress and walked out wearing her strength. About the fine line between justice and vengeance, and how sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, but about refusing to let them destroy you. The sun was setting somewhere over the Atlantic when the flight attendant brought me another glass of champagne. "Special occasion?" she asked, noticing I was writing. I looked out at the clouds, painted pink and gold by the fading light. "You could say that," I replied. "It's the first day of the rest of my life." She smiled and moved on to the next passenger, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the endless sky. I didn't know exactly what waited for me in Bora Bora, or what would happen when I eventually returned home. Life had taught me that certainty was an illusion anyway. But I knew this much. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, at 35,000 feet, a woman who thought she was going to be a bride found something better instead. She found herself. My phone would stay off for the next week, but I knew what I would find when I finally turned it back on. Missed calls from family and friends. Voicemails ranging from concerned to angry to congratulatory. Messages from Trevor and Sarah, probably alternating between apologies and accusations. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them learn what it feels like to have no control over a narrative. As for me, I had a private villa with an infinity pool waiting. I had a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. I had a future stretching out before me, unmarred by lies or betrayal. And I had time, all the time in the world, to decide what I wanted to write in the next chapter of my story.